Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give folks a moment to land in the room. But while we're waiting, if you want to hop in the chat and make sure you select everyone so that way your chat will go to everyone. But let us know, who you are, where you're from, whether that's geographically, your school, your organization. I always like to see who lands in our virtual community spaces. Welcome. Oh, I fixed the chat. All right. Hopefully you all can get in there now. The second time in a row it got me. I see we have a child life specialist. Hello, Georgia. Thank you, Elizabeth. There we go. New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Good morning, LA.
We have people from all over the place.
Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Yes. I work with someone who's defaulted to just saying good day, and maybe that's a practice I should try to be more intentional with. So good day.
That's a good one. Inclusive.
Yeah, wherever you are in the globe.
I guess unless it's worldwide, it could be evening sometimes.
Oh, well, welcome everyone. I am Evelyn Moon. I am Director of Education at an organization called Good Grief, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to spend time with you all today. Sending immense gratitude for your time, your presence, your attention, and I'm also grateful for our wonderful presenter. So today's session is part of our Good Grief Community webinar series. So every school year, we bring you content, experts, information, resources. It's all just a way to extend the work that we do outside of the walls of our centers and into this virtual space. And I'll say up front, anyone who's attending this session live will receive a certificate of attendance within the next 48 hours. So keep an eye out. It'll come to you from our constant contact system. So for those of you who might be new to Good Grief, we are a nonprofit organization. We've been around in New Jersey since 2004, and our mission is to build resilience in children, strengthen families, and empower communities to grow from loss and adversity. This is just a big picture view of some of our work. We provide family support services, so that's called our Nights of Support, in person in our two centers, that's in Princeton and also in Morristown. But we also provide services over Zoom, so we have a virtual space as well. We work with schools. We run a weekly summer camp. So in August, there's a week where grieving children can come to us at no cost to them and take part in our Grief Expression Summer Camp. Our Good Grief Spring Institute is coming up in March. This is an in-person event focused on grief and addiction. We have professional development and training, parent and caregiver education, and our Youth and Funerals initiative. But I don't want to take up any more of the air here talking about me and talking about Good Grief, because I could do that all day. I want to introduce our presenter. So Catherine Moore is a double alumni from California State University, Long Beach, with a bachelor's, a BSW, and an MSW. She's been a licensed clinical social worker since 2019. Catherine is the host of the Social Workers Rise podcast, the founder of the Rise Directory. She's a professional trainer and a therapist, and her experience as a medical social worker has made her an expert in topics like grief, anxiety, and life transitions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and thank you so much. Welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to jump into this conversation. I'm going to share my screen with you and kind of go over, how this next hour is going to go. So I'm going to make this as informational, but also as engaging as possible, because overall, I want you to have fun. It's not a fun topic, but that doesn't mean that we can't enjoy learning about it, because we really need to be able to have fun in our field so that we can support our clients in the best way possible. And they can feel when we are kind of not feeling it ourselves. So there's no rules in grief, right? But thankfully, this isn't grief, so we do have some rules here. The rule is I do want you to engage in the chat. And we kind of covered, I saw that a lot of you are professionals working in the field from all over the country. I even saw Indonesia. So thank you so much for sharing that. It helps me to know, who you are, who I'm talking to. Feel free to ask questions and just double check that you're on mute if you're not speaking, but I think that's covered. So we'll be good to go. Today, we're going to talk about what anticipatory grief is. We're going to explore how anticipatory grief impacts our lives and the various stages of it. And in my opinion, most importantly, we're going to discuss some ways to effectively cope with anticipatory grief today. So a little bit about me is I'm Catherine. I'm a social worker based out of Southern California. And a lot of my professional work has been based in medical social work. I do private therapy right now, but I'm coming from years of working with patients and families in hospice, in palliative care settings, in the hospital, in emergency rooms, in the intensive care unit, and even within the women's hospital, or where they give birth and have babies and things like that. So coming at it from all different angles, and I will tell you that anticipatory grief really impacts people in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different settings and situations as well. I remember when I was working with hospice, and hospice, you see a lot of anticipatory grief. And it's important to know that each person feels this differently. So especially when working with large families, you really want to be aware that everyone is going to be having their own experience with this. And to be honest, nobody really knows what anticipatory grief is. The general population has not heard this term before. And they just know that they're feeling all sorts of emotions, and it's not pleasant, right? And this happens especially when we have multiple family members, because if there's a loved one passing away or dying, they will have, a lot of times they might have a spouse, they might have their oldest child, the youngest child, the child who lives across the country and has never really been there. And so each person is going to have their own specific experience with losing, or with the death of their loved one, or the anticipated death of their loved one. So what is different about anticipatory grief versus traditional grief, if you will, is traditional grief is we're grieving the loss of someone or something that is gone. And anticipatory grief is we are grieving the loss of what we may lose. And that includes a lot of different losses, as far as the person, the future that we had imagined, the plans that we had, the life that we know the life that we know now. All of these things may change. So I'm curious to know, in what situations may we experience anticipatory grief? And you can drop this in the chat. I'm curious to see, what types of experiences you think that this might creep up in. If you have the outline that was sent out prior to the workshop, then you have a cheat sheet. Yeah, so diagnosis, relocation, death, divorce, hospice, terminal illness. Yes. Yes, and terminal illness is the one that we think of a lot, the one that we hear about the most, right? Incarceration. Oh yes, that's a good one too. I left that one out. I'll have to add that for the next presentation, Dora. Thank you. So these are some, and starting dialysis. Yeah, very good. Yeah, big life changes. So these are some common situations when anticipatory grief may be present. It's really anytime there is a expected change or a loss, right? So patients with a terminal illness, as well as their family members and caregivers, neighbors, community, religious community, they all may experience anticipatory grief. And in one study conducted in Ireland, 29 people caring for a family member with Parkinson's filled out a questionnaire to assess their level of anticipatory grief. And caregivers were preoccupied with thoughts about what life could have been if they were never diagnosed. So a lot of what ifs, right? In hospice, I saw a lot of guilt around, was there something that I could have done differently to have prevented this? When there's a cancer risk, the patients may imagine, when a cancer diagnosis may come. So even if they don't have a diagnosis yet, they're still thinking about when it may come or when it may change their life. So I was working in a palliative care clinic, and we had a gentleman with cancer who was actually cured. They got the cancer all taken out. He had no more cancer, but the family said, "Can you please talk to his wife? Because she is so, so anxious." And I thought that was bizarre, because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, she should be happy and relieved. So let's see what's going on here. But this is exactly what it was, is she was so worried about if the cancer is going to come back, and what is she going to do then? What is going to happen? How is she going to hire a caregiver? And I told her, look, I helped her realize that by her focusing so much on what could come, she's missing out on her ultimate wish, was to have him cancer free. And she was missing out on this amazing time in their life when he was healthy, he's cancer free. And she had this awareness, like, oh my gosh, you're right. And I followed up with the family maybe a month later or so, and they said she was so much better. They're just loving life and super happy. So we had to make that connection for her to live in the moment and try not to focus on what may come. It's good to plan. However, don't live there. Try to live in the moment. Another situation may be a transplant. If someone is waiting for a transplant, they may be grieving the possible scenarios of their own death. Also, patients on a heart transplant list were grieving in this way because they were worried about their own future, but also that someone had to die in order for them to be able to live their lives. Another situation is an amputation. Amputees found that the time before the operation can actually be the most upsetting. And patients often expressed anticipatory grief over the unknowns surrounding the future, including, possible pain that they may have to endure, financial difficulties, and just general health and future functional abilities. What is their life going to look like after this happens? How is this going to impact my family? Am I going to be able to work? What does that look like? Another situation is for parents who learn that their unborn baby may not survive. They may experience anticipatory grief around that loss, or around if they get news that their baby has some sort of developmental disability or something that's wrong, that's going to drastically impact the life of them and their baby. They're going to worry about what their future is going to look like. And at the same time, they may be grieving the loss of the future that they had envisioned for themselves and for their child. This is the same thing. I saw this a lot in the hospital when there were premature births. And a lot of times when I talked to the parents, they were grieving over the loss of what their planned birth was going to look like, especially if this is their first child, or if they had been trying for a long time, many, many years, sometimes, to get pregnant, and they learned that the baby is coming early, months early sometimes, and they didn't get the baby shower yet. They don't have the baby room set up, or they wanted to have a natural birth, and that was very important to them, but now it has to be a C-section, and now the baby can't go home with them right away. And it's that loss of, oh my gosh, I had this vision of what it was going to be like, and now that is not going to happen. And is my baby going to survive? Is the future that we planned going to work out? And so these are a lot of the symptoms that people may experience around anticipatory grief. And I've touched on a lot of these, right? Anxiety, the desperation, dread, guilt. So a lot of different symptoms that may come up. Denial. I saw this. I mean, this can happen a lot. Like, no, it's not true. It's not going to happen. And especially people, if we're talking about people on hospice, if you haven't seen your loved one in a very long time, it can be a shock to see, oh my gosh, last time I saw them at Thanksgiving, they were fine. And now less than a year later, you're telling me that they're going to die. And it can be really, really difficult to deal with, because then come up the feelings of guilt. Oh man, I should have visited them a lot more often. I should have called more. Do they know how I really feel about them? Because we always had a tense relationship. Also, they may be focused on, they may have a preoccupation with the dying person. So a lot of times, especially with widows, I will see that they are just so focused on them, and they forget to take care of themselves. They don't shower. They forget to eat. They forget to drink water. And they are so engulfed in this worry around, what am I going to do when my spouse is gone? They're my main support system. You know, they help me pay the bills. I don't even know how to write a check or how to log on to the internet. And so even those day-to-day tasks can trigger a lot of really stressful emotions, because they feel like they're being left alone. And in some cases, they may be left alone, in fact. And that's why it's so important. And we'll talk about, you know, how to deal with anticipatory grief, that we set up those support systems. A lot of times people are just tired. They lack motivation. They feel lonely. There's hardly anyone to talk to. I mean, who wants to hear about this sad story? And a lot of times people don't want to share their grief or their hurt, because they don't want other people to feel the same way. And so they hide it, they stuff it down, and they pretend like it's not there. And that's why your role as the social worker, as the mental health professional, as the volunteer, your role is so important, to just normalize that this is to be expected. You're not weird. There's nothing wrong with you. It's normal if you feel guilt around this. It's normal if you feel relief around this. Because a lot of times people who have been maybe searching for answers, or especially with Alzheimer's and dementia, there may be a sense of relief once someone has gone, or once we know that the final days are approaching, and then guilt associated with that, thinking, oh my gosh, how am I relieved, because I love this person so much, but they're relieved that there won't be any more suffering. And they may also be relieved that they can go on with their life a lot of times, especially as someone who's been a caregiver for a very, very long time. We're talking years, you know, maybe I've met caregivers for 20 years, and their life has been on hold, and they have no longer been a spouse or a friend. It's just been a caregiver, because unfortunately that is where their spouse was, is they were no longer able to engage. They were no longer able to have those conversations, to laugh with one another. And instead of being a spouse and a friend, they are now just a caregiver, and they're ready to move on and say goodbye. Also, too, I want to mention that the younger a person is, the more intense they may experience anticipatory grief, especially as it relates to a death. In a review of 15 studies talking about anticipatory grief and illness, doctors at the University of Illinois at Chicago found that younger caregivers and younger patients tended to report higher ratings of anticipatory grief. And in one study of adults with terminal cancer, patients under 25 experienced more anticipatory grief than patients 26 to 55. And I found this especially to be true across the board, because people who are young, a lot of times they haven't had a lot of experience with death. And two, there's a lot more that they're grieving because they were envisioning a whole lifetime maybe with this person. And now their whole lifetime, what they have worked up to for the past maybe 25 years is now changed. Right? For my whole life, I thought I was going to have my spouse, and now they're gone. And if I'm a young person who has lost my spouse, there's not a lot of people who understand that, right? A lot of people in their 80s and 90s have lost a spouse. So there's a lot of people to talk to. However, when you're younger, it's hard to find that social support. You have to specifically go and seek it out. And thank you for sharing, Megan, in the chat, that it was true with the death of your husband when your daughter was 9 months old. You were only 29. That's really hard because you're now grieving the loss of your child's dad and your partner who you envisioned raising this baby with, and the loss of you feel the loss every time that something happens, every time there's a milestone, a birthday, a holiday, that he should be there and he's not. And that can be really, really hard to cope with. And also to, just talking about like anticipatory, right, is that you're going to be thinking and planning and worrying about, what do I do? What does my life look like? Now I'm going to be a single parent. This is not the life that I envisioned for myself. And there are stages to anticipatory grief. And again, there's no rules, right? So we're not going to just one day accept that the death is happening. Maybe for some, but for some, it may not happen like that. It may come in waves. It may come in different stages that yes, the death is going to happen. It's inevitable. And a lot of times this co-occurs with feelings of sadness and depression. Next is feeling overall concern for the person who's dying. And this may actually trigger some feelings of regret over past arguments or disagreements with the person. And for the person who's dying, this may translate into a fear of, what is it like to die? What's going to happen to my family? I don't want to have to say goodbye to them. Next is rehearsing or thinking about the death. And a person may become really focused and really task-oriented on funeral arrangements, things that need to be done, accounts that need to be fixed, life insurance, caregivers. Again, saying goodbye, what is that going to be like? And just other concerns that are related to, what will happen in the time immediately surrounding my death? What's that going to be like? How are people going to react or respond? A lot of times people would tell me that they just want their family to be together in one room without an argument, And that is their last wish, that their children and their family would just all get along. And I've been in many rooms where it was a struggle, but a lot of times they were able to pull it off, out of respect for their loved one. And lastly, you're imagining the future. And this can be hard for some people because by imagining the future, they may feel like they're giving up on their loved one. But it is important to talk about the future, especially if this is one of their concerns with both the person who is dying and the person who's going to be left behind, right? Because the person who is dying may be worried that their family maybe won't be able to make it financially, that their loved one may become very depressed or stop being social or withdraw. There's a lot of different concerns that the person who's dying has. And a lot of times they just need that reassurance that it's going to be okay, and that they have made the plans, they have prepared as much as possible for what is to come. And same thing with the family. They're thinking about what is their life going to be like now, especially now, we're in October. The holidays are coming up, special occasions, right? They're here. Those traditions might look different. Well, they will look different. They will definitely look different if their loved one is not here, especially if that person was the holiday person. Sometimes it's like, oh, my mom was she was the one who made the cookies and who decorated the house. And now she's gone. And who's going to make the cookies and who's going to decorate the house? The holidays just won't be the same without them. And also too, imagining the future for the person who is going to die is they may be imagining what happens after they die. And what is their spirituality? What does their belief say around that? Sometimes it can be really peaceful, or other times it could just be void, blank emptiness, or worse. So it's important to be able to talk about people about these different topics, and really, again, reiterate that these feelings are normal, and be that person for them, because sometimes they may not have social support to talk about it. If they do, maybe they don't want to be overwhelming their people with these feelings, or they don't want to feel like they're imparting pain or grief onto their loved ones and friends and social support. Additionally, social supports, friends, neighbors, community members, they may not know what to say or how to be there for their friend. And a lot of times they withdraw. So I've seen this a lot with caregivers who are losing a spouse, or spouses who are losing a spouse, that their friends essentially leave them alone. And it's hurtful because they feel like, oh no, I'm that depressing friend. I'm the one who brings everybody down. And now that my spouse is dying, nobody's here for me. They don't call, they don't come over to visit like they do. We don't have game nights like we used to, because people don't know what to say. So it is important that we can equip people with, what to do and how to react. So we talked about all the bad stuff, right? Well, not bad, but real, if you will, the real stuff. And now we're going to go into the hope part of the presentation. How can we effectively cope with anticipatory grief? And I'm curious, what are some ways that you think that we can cope with this, that we can help others cope with this as well? And thank you for sharing in the chat a lot of really great responses. I'm just getting caught up reading. Yes, very good. So some ways that we can cope is listening and validating, talking about your feelings, being present, supporting their wishes. Very good. Asking questions, acceptance, validating any kind of fears that might come up, being patient, mindfulness and grounding techniques, self-care for sure, support groups, encouraging others to take care of themselves, and new rituals. Look at you. I could just sign off right now. You guys are great. Don't try to fix or lessen the pain. Yeah. Talk about it. That's really the main way to cope with anticipatory grief. You know, time after time, the research has shown that social supports are the best way to cope with anticipatory grief, which is ironic because I just said that our social supports may retreat sometimes. So it's a catch-22. This is the thing that a lot of people need most, but our society has not prepared us to really support people who need this. We don't know how to talk about an upcoming death. We don't know what to say. And it is important to note that the quality of the relationships are definitely more important than the quantity, because if I have two really great friends or family members, neighbors, people that I can talk to and really be real about it, that's going to do much more for my mental health than having 10 of my neighbors over who I have to gloss over it with, right? So we definitely want to encourage the quality of relationships. And these are some things that when we're talking about it, that we might need to say either to our loved one or the loved one who's dying, or for this may need to be said on all angles, right? So the person who is dying may need to be able to say these things. And our support system may need to say this to the person who is dying, right? And this comes whenever there's a change, a loss, with all of those different situations that we talked about. There may be these things that need to be said. And this is the way that we are able to find peace and reduce that regret and reduce that feeling of guilt. And a lot of times these are hard because we may not feel ready. We may not, it's something that maybe we've never said to the other person before. And sometimes it may just be something heavy on our heart that we can't even put words to. So a lot of times I would work with people who, for example, there was a gentleman who had alcoholic cirrhosis, and he was relatively young, in his 50s, and he did not have a good relationship with his adult children, never had. And so I talked with him about it. I said, you know, do your children know that the doctors are saying you only have, you know, days or weeks to live? He said, no, I don't know that they would really care. And it turns out that we did get him to call them. And he was just so scared because they haven't talked in years. He felt like he had failed them as a father. And for him to be able to say, I'm sorry, I do love you, that was very, very healing for him. And I remember one of his children was able to accept it and say, I forgive you and I love you too. While the other one, was not able to get to that point. And so again, it's going to be different with everybody. But if you can bring these up with the people that you're visiting, the people that you're talking to, and see, is there anything that you need to say to them while you have the chance? And by doing this will reduce your risk for complicated grief later on. So we talked about, I saw in the comments, just acknowledging and being present with your loved one and using that mindfulness technique. So, going back to the woman who was so worried about the cancer coming back, it was getting in the way of her enjoying her husband as he is, as a healthy individual, and just reminding them that we are present in the moment right now. Let's just be here right now so that we can enjoy the time that we have left, right? Because these moments are fleeting. And one way to kind of refocus their minds is by using the mindfulness technique. So hopefully this was sent out to you before, but this is a really simple grounding technique that is easy for people to do and can really help to focus them in the moment so that they're not thinking about the past, they're not thinking about the future, but they're able to really truly be present. And a lot of times I will couple this with some mindful breathing, and even just doing 10 breaths can make a huge difference. And a lot of times people will say, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I feel so much more relaxed just after those 10 breaths. And they're able to focus a lot better, as opposed to having that anxiety kind of run the show. We're getting control back over our brains and saying, anxiety, hey, buzz off. We'll have our time to be anxious later, but now is not the moment. So next up is active listening. Very important to be listening to everybody involved, right? Everybody's going to be having their own different experiences. And if they know that we're really being heard, then it goes such a long way. Again, because our social supports may be withdrawing, they may not know what to say, but if we can just talk to you, especially as a professional, and know that you're sitting there listening, it's such a weight off of our shoulders. Next up is validating the feelings. So there's lots of feelings that come up. And again, there's no rules for this, and that's okay, because we're each going to have our individual experiences and our own coping tools, our own level of resiliency, and that's okay. All of those feelings are completely normal. And it can be such a relief for people to hear that it's normal to feel relief and guilt at the same time. Like, you're not alone in this. It doesn't have to be a big secret that we talk about. Like, I remember for me I was 18, and my grandmother had a massive stroke, and she couldn't talk, couldn't get out of bed. And she always said, if I ever get to the point where someone has to wipe my own butt, then I don't want to be here anymore. And man, it was so hard, because she said that so much. And then that's exactly what happened. Someone had to wipe her butt. And I knew every single time she went to the bathroom, she was feeling humiliated and angry and sad and just wanting to go, because she believed that she would go and see her husband. And so it felt like forever. It was about 6 months that she was in this state. And as a teenager, I didn't know what to do. I was 18, just got to college. I had no idea what to do. So I withdrew. I didn't know how to handle it. And I didn't have, again, you know, as a young person, I didn't have a lot of people who could help guide me or help talk to me about it. And so for a long time, I felt guilty around leaving her, abandoning her, which I know that's not what I did. But that as a teenager, like that's, and after she had gone, after she died, that's how I felt. And so I just remember if I would have had someone to be able to share these feelings with, I thought it was a really big secret that I felt relief that she had gone. I felt relief that she no longer had to be confined to that bed. And then, of course, I felt guilty, right? Because I should have, I quote, you know, should have done all these things differently. So just having that validation would have been extremely powerful, and honestly would have saved you years of guilt. So if you can provide that for your people, I definitely encourage it. So here are some ways that we can validate feelings. And I know a lot of us as professionals, you know, we probably know this, but it is good to just revisit and to get some ideas, because again, we don't want to say, I know what it's like, because you don't, right? Your experience is going to be different than theirs. But these are some safe phrases that you can say to let the person know that you're listening, that you're there, that you are, you know, understanding or trying to understand what they're feeling. And next is just knowing and normalizing that grief doesn't mean that you are giving up, right? A lot of times I've seen people, especially if it's a new illness or a quick diagnosis or a new, you know, new update with someone's baby, they would say, like, if I grieve, that means that I'm accepting it. It means that I'm giving up. It means that I'm not going to try anymore. And what we really need to be helping them do is really reframe, you know, what does this look like? What does this look like for you? You know, and let's talk about both scenarios, right? We hope that the doctors are wrong. We don't want this to be true. And if that happens, cool, you know, we can continue on with the way our life is now. But we also need to be prepared for if the doctors are right. What does that look like? How do we plan for that? What kind of social supports can we bring in if the doctors turn out to be right? And that doesn't mean that we're giving up. It means that we can prepare as much as possible. You're never 100% prepared for these things, but at least it can reduce some anxiety and letting them know, like, we're not giving up. We still love you, but we're also going to be prepared for either outcome. Make sure your basic needs are being met. Again, with people who are experiencing all of these emotions and worrying about the future, they're not thinking of, oh, did I put on deodorant today? When was the last time I took a shower? I don't remember if I even have shampoo. I'm not sure. Because it's just not top of their mind. They're so focused on the person outside of them, their loved one, that they completely forget to get their water, to make breakfast for themselves. Because a lot of times, especially as a caregiver, you're making breakfast, then you're going over to feed them, then you're cleaning up, then, oh my gosh, you know, there was an accident. Now we have to clean up that. And before we know it, the day has passed and we have not eaten or drink water, right? Or yes, medications. That is a very important one, to remember your medication. So another reason why it's important to encourage social supports, so that we have those outside people to really make sure that we're all being taken care of, because it really does take a village. And especially if you are looking at a caregiver situation, 24-hour care for one person is a lot, and it can be overwhelming. And next and last is the therapy and grief support groups, right? So like we said, it's important to talk about it with people. If people feel like they need additional support, therapy and grief support groups are a great place to go to have all of these needs met, to talk about it, to acknowledge the losses, to learn how to be present, learn the mindfulness, have someone who's actively going to be listening to them and validating their feelings and helping them plan for the future. What does that look like? Reminding them, hey, have you showered this week? Right. So those people to follow up with them. And additionally, grief support groups are also really powerful because it gives them a place to go where they don't feel like they're burdening other people, because they get it. This group of people understands what it's like to be grieving as a young person, as an older person, as a spouse, as a mom, all of these different roles that we play. And so yes, repeated the slide. So it really is a place that we can process our emotions. And again, to remind people that mental health is not the same as mental illness, right? So just because that we might recommend therapy or counseling, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them, right? All of these emotions, like we said, are normal. However, our society doesn't always give us the tools to cope with it. And I think making that distinction, especially with someone who is hesitant, like, no, I'm not crazy, I don't need a shrink. Like, you're right, you're not crazy, but you do need someone to talk to. You do need to be able to get these thoughts out of your head so that they're not just jumbling up in there, right? And a lot of times, narrative therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy are shown to be one of the most effective forms of therapy when helping people cope with anticipatory grief. And so that is all of the tools that research has shown, in my research, that is really helpful in supporting people with anticipatory grief. A lot of talking, a lot of talking. So the more that we can talk about it and the more social supports, the better. So I am open for questions, questions or comments. And you can share your questions in the chat. Yeah, Karen, knowing that you're not alone is very encouraging. A lot of times, because sometimes we are so caught up in what's going on in our lives that we can't even poke our heads out to see, like, is there other people who have gone through this? I'm just alone in my house and it feels really lonely right now.
So we'll just give folks, again, you can use the chat or you can use the Q&A. I guess a question to kick things off. So when thinking about anticipatory grief, is there anything that people should keep in mind when they are anticipating the death of someone that maybe they didn't have a good relationship with, or is it really all sort of the same?
That's a good question, because that comes up a lot. And a lot of times we may not be necessarily ready to say, I forgive you, or why did this happen? What happened? What is the truth, right? And that can be hard. That takes courage to ask those questions and to have those conversations. I read a story, I was reading a book, and Oprah was telling a story about how she didn't have a good relationship with her mother. And when she found out that her mother was dying, she went and sat next to her for, a whole day, 2 days, and they didn't say anything. They hadn't talked in years. And she said, even though I talked to strangers on my show every single day, I didn't know what the heck to say to my mom. And she left. And before she left, I think before she got on the airplane, she said, I can't leave without saying something. And she went back and it was a song that they ended up playing that she remembered that her mom liked. And that got them talking. And so she was able to have that conversation and find closure, right? Find that closure and find the forgiveness, which can be really hard. Roberta, when you have kids who think about their parents dying when there are no issues involved, what are some suggestions to address that? So I'm guessing by kids, you mean people younger than 18. And this really depends on their developmental level. Middle school, yeah. So students in middle school and really, generally over the age of 6 or 7, even 5 sometimes, they know that something's going on. And so really being honest with them about what's happening helps to support them during this time when they may be experiencing anticipatory grief. And children do not react the same as we do. Sometimes there may even be a delayed response to that. So for example, with younger children, they may hear you and then they may come back an hour later and say, wait, so mom is sick and she's not going to be here anymore. And so it takes them some time to process. Students in middle school, again, it depends on your relationship with them, but sometimes they may withdraw, they may exhibit more behavioral changes. They may find additional support within their peers. So they might find that they are withdrawing to their friends, or they may avoid. They might not know how to handle the emotions that they have. So just being able to help label those emotions for them, again, being that support, being that safe place, encouraging honest conversations and answering their questions is really, really big. And again, that family support, if you can draw in all of the possible supports, friends, family, cousin, then that's going to be really, really good in helping them through this entire process, because it's not just the anticipatory grief. We also want to set them up with these social supports for after the death has happened. How do you discuss with children who learn their family member has COVID? For instance, my 10-year-old learned his dad has COVID. He instantly became overwhelmed with dad dying. So it sounds like your 10-year-old has experienced or knows of that COVID can make you let's see, sorry. So for the 10-year-old, it sounds like they really need a lot of reassurance. So reassurance, and again, the grounding that, dad's here, we're going to take good care of him, reassuring them, but also being truthful, because at 10 years old, what's going on and you're really scared. So just helping them process what they're feeling, again, labeling those emotions for them, and being able to help them spend as much time as possible with dad. I know it's hard with COVID, it could be hard to spend time depending on where he's at, if he's at the hospital. But yeah, just being honest and trying to keep them in the present moment with them. It might also have to do with their anxiety and if anyone else in their support system passed away or got diagnosed with something. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, with COVID, there's so many different variables that are coming up. So yeah, the anxiety. And again, if they knew someone else, it could trigger that trauma from having lost someone else and oh my gosh, is dad going to end up dying like this other person I knew did? And it can be really scary. Sometimes, oh yes, thank you. Sometimes death can trigger this awareness and thoughts in young people. If this person can die, then anyone can die. And they might worry about the people they care about the most, or even themselves. Deep listening, being honest, and maybe outside support might help with your young people. Yes, thank you. Very good. News. Oh yeah, news with COVID. That's where it's coming up. Question about children's books. Oh, I'm sorry, Georgia. I missed the question about children's books. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Do you have recommendations for young children to address anticipatory grief? There are, I've seen a couple, not very many. I know, oh, butchering them. I know there's one about a dragonfly. So there's one where, what was it? Was it a dragon? I think it was a dragonfly or a frog. So the gist of the story is that there are tadpoles living underwater, and it's probably not a very good one. It'd be more spiritual, but whatever. So the story is like tadpoles, they're swimming underwater, and then eventually they kind of grow their legs and they go above the water, and then they're gone. So, I mean, I'll have to find that book. But there also is another one about a caterpillar, kind of with the same thing, where the caterpillar knows they're going to be making a transition and they're going to have to say goodbye to their other caterpillar friends. They're going to cuddle up in their cocoon in their bed, and eventually, you know, they will spread their wings and fly away, and they will no longer be here with, yeah, thank you, water bugs and dragonflies, that they will no longer be here with their people. Yeah. And if you know of books, feel free to enter them in the chat. I see that we have The Invisible String there. Dinosaurs Die. Thank you for. Yep. Yeah. Oh, thank you. And then they'll send some book recommendations in the follow-up email after this event. How do you respond to parents, staff, students who inquire about the potential of a school shooting, addressing the potential for collective grief experience? That is a great question, Catherine. I will defer to someone else on that, because that's out of my, if someone has advice for that, you're welcome to hop on.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough because they're getting into the what ifs. And I think it's so easy with the news to sort of get caught up, because again, it's that if this can happen there, this can happen anywhere. And that means it can also happen to me. And I think it's the same sort of grounding them in the same skills, the same resources, approaching them with very similar mindsets, because ultimately what you want to do is sort of ground them in the reality. I mean, you can let them know how safe your building is, what the protocols are that you have in place, but it's hard when people kind of get stuck in this this loop, especially when it's attached to the news. So I think all that you could do is, you know, offer what your protocol is, what you're doing to keep your building safe and secure, you know, what your plans are if something happens. I will say we have some good friends at the School Crisis and Bereavement Center, so I would highly recommend looking up their website. They have excellent resources for when there's been some kind of tragedy in school communities. They specialize in things like school shootings. I would love to live in a world where we didn't need an organization like that and resources like this, but I highly, highly recommend that you check them out.
Yes, thank you for that. And that can be hard every time that there's an active shooter drill. I mean, 5 times a year, it keeps it at the top of the minds of everybody in the school. Yeah.
All right. So I think I am just going to pop my screen up, if that's okay with you, Catherine,
Yeah.
and start to land this plane here.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm wondering, you know, did you have a big takeaway from the session today?
Yeah, pop it in the chat. I want to share with you all a few things. So it's a big block of text, and I apologize for that, but in it you will find our survey. You will find links to our upcoming webinars, so you could see next month. So for those of you that may not be aware, November is Children's Grief Awareness Month, and then we have Children's Grief Awareness Day. We will have Dr. Chris Lipperini, good friend of Good Grief, who will be talking about bibliotherapy and grief. In December, we have Allie Briggs. She is co-founder and CEO of LifeWeb 360. We're going to talk about going beyond memory boxes. So my good grief friends that are here, I know you all know about our memory boxes, but what do we do in this digital age to start to sort of gather those memories and those pieces and create what they call life webs that can be something that they can treasure and hold on to remember their person. So as always, if you want to check out our website, we are good-grief.org. We have our resources. This will be recorded and put onto YouTube. So hello to our friends that are watching this later on. And if you ever need anything, I'm Evelyn with 2 N's at good-grief.org. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to stop this recording.